All right. Good evening, everybody. Um, and welcome to our band nerd hangout. Yeah, so tonight we're going to talk about strings in the wind band. Um, Hopefully, what? Did I miss something? Yeah, I'm here. I'm gonna go off screen here in a minute or so because the coffee is not finished brewing yet. But yeah. So anyway, guys, yeah, welcome. Looks like you got 8 viewers, 9 viewers now. Awesome sauce. And yeah, so we are going to talk about the use of strings within the wind ensemble. Hello, Larry. Hello, Cool. And of course, mine and Ratchet. And mine and Ratchet, we've been discussing stuff all week over in the Discord, which has just turned out to be a really phenomenal idea. It's just been a lot of fun having that Discord server going, where we just talk all things band nerdy. What kind of coffee am I drinking? It is espresso. This is I think it's the Starbucks Komodo Dragon blend. So dark roast. Hey Jared, Jared, I will send you an email in just a little bit. It looks like we've got a deal on that. I played in a band where we had a cello player in place of bassoon. Um, that doesn't surprise me. So, yeah, we're going to talk strings in the wind ensemble today. And I think really the best place to start is, of course, talking about the double bass. Um, and I know I talked about wanting to do guitars this week. I've been, of course, talking with my friend. He is going to do it. It may not be a Thursday, and so we may have to schedule that for another night. But yeah, but we are going to do it. He's all set, but he has got some company coming in, and so we'll deal with that. But anyway, yeah. So let's start with the double bass in the wind ensemble. Um, Now, a lot of people I know have said that they want to keep the wind ensemble pure and only have wind instruments. But if we're being honest, the double bass has been a member of the wind ensemble since the classical era, since the 1770s, at least, if not earlier than that. So, it's one of the founding members, and it's an instrument that I have struggled to come to terms with myself, my own writing, and it's I think partly because I never had great experiences with the double bass in the wind ensemble. Partly I think because we only saw it at the college level, and so I didn't see it in high school ensembles ever. And you only would see it in the very top wind ensembles at the university level. You didn't see it in the lower ones, at least where I was. Now, it could have been that in other places it's much more common, particularly in places where, excuse me, string programs are um, much more ubiquitous. But anyway, so yeah, the double bass goes all the way back to the harmony music. That's stuff like Mozart's Grand Partita. And by the way, people have always said there's some doubt whether Mozart wanted a double bass or a contrabassoon. There's actually not really any doubt. It's double bass. I performed the piece back in April, I guess, or May. And in studying it, it's double bass. I mean, with all the pizzicato stuff in there, it's got to be double bass. When you have them all together, I find the double bass, tuba, bass saxophone, and contrabass clarinet make an excellent sounding quartet in the wind band. Yes, finding all four of those instruments together in one ensemble. I'm trying to think if I've ever actually seen that. I don't think I have ever actually witnessed an ensemble that had um, all four of those instruments at the same time. I have played pieces that have had bass saxophone in it, but those pieces have not used contra clarinet. So yeah, that's it'd be interesting. Um, Pugalo, have you actually seen a piece that uses that? What's interesting with that is the contrabass clarinets start coming into the literature as the bass saxophones are fading, and there's very little crossover unless you're doing something like Alfred Reed. The low, woody sounds of double bass, contrabassoon, and contra clarinet blend so well. Yeah, they do. Hey, Sweeter. Yeah, we just started. Jared, what piece did you play? I'd be interested to know what piece you were doing. Never mind. I can already tell you what it is. I bet that it was Russian Christmas music. This time of year, a piece that has that instrumentation, Russian Christmas music. Alfred Reed. He's the only person I know that's scoring for contrabass, clarinet, and bass sax in the same piece. But anyway, yeah. So double bass, and you guys give me about 30 seconds. The coffee just finished, and I need me some caffeine. All right. So, yes, first suite and E flat folk song suite have those instruments. No, they don't. Neither does first suite or second suite. Um, the so the to the first suite and the second suite and the folk song suite, the baritone sax, the bass sax, the contrabass, clarinet were all added by editors. The only original saxophone parts are one alto, one tenor for all of those pieces. There is no bass clarinet part to any of those pieces either. So, yeah. All right. So, yeah, so let's get back to double bass. And for a long time, it was really the de facto soft bass instrument in the wind ensemble. So the tubas would take the loud stuff, and then you had the double bass. We played the Freddie Fennell version recently, and there were so many things about it that made me sad. No. The Fennell version is the correct version. The Fennell version has gone back to the original manuscript. That's the correct version. It uses the correct instrumentation. So I'll start with some questions. Do most band double bass parts utilize a low C extension? How common are they? Would you recommend scoring for it? What about a 5-string German bass? Okay. In general, most of what I have seen in wind bands are 4-string basses. No low C extension. I ended up adding a double bass part to Symphony 4, and when I was writing it out, I made sure to only stop at E. So there's no notes in Symphony 4 below E. No, Mark, I already covered that. My friend Michael will not be doing it this stream. It'll be sometime in the future. But anyway, so yeah, it is possible within a professional wind ensemble that you'll see a low C extension. As far as a 5-string German bass, I would not count on it. Um, Percy Granger, interestingly, wrote his double bass parts for basses tuned half a step lower, so E flat, A flat, and I think he actually did E flat, A flat, E flat, A flat, and um, there are some parts where you will get an actual transposed bass part to accommodate Percy Granger's weird tunings. But in general, I would not write much lower than E for a typical wind band. Okay. Okay, lots of stuff. It's interesting for me to see how uncommon to have players doubling on tuba and double bass for pit. And other ensembles be a bass specialist, not a brass specialist. I guess that was how it was done back in the day. If you played the bass line, so you played either double bass or tuba. That was just that's how you got your job. When Holst says basses in the score, do they mean double basses? No, it means tubas. In British brass band, and a lot of times just throughout England, the term basses will refer to all your tubas. So British brass band, it's the E flat basses and the B flat basses. They don't use the term tuba, which I find very, very unusual. The bass player in our band had a 5-string. That is unusual. You don't see a lot of 5 strings in this country. That's much more of a European thing. Sometimes they go to low B, sometimes they don't. It depends on if the player tunes them in fourths or just tunes the low string to C. Aside from complete impracticality of getting one, how about octo bass? We'll get to octo bass in a little bit. Because I have written the chapter already in volume 4 on the octo bass. And so yeah, but we'll get to octo here in a little bit. But regular double bass is the most important, so we'll talk about it. All right, I got my hot bitter going. Okay, so anyway, yeah. A lot of times, and I think I saw somebody comment on this about just copy and pasting the tuba part into the double bass part, and that is just lazy scoring, and that's not how you should do it. Yes. So yeah, Larry, I'm getting to your question right now. So yeah. We'll get to vials in a little bit, Sweeter. I do have a section on vials in the upcoming book. So yes, we will get to that. But anyway, so scoring for the double bass is surprisingly, I find, difficult. As much as I hate using the term, it's a color instrument, and that would be another Brett's hot takes. There's no such thing as a color instrument in the band. Every instrument's a color instrument, but by and large, so the double bass is, I think the double bass is best when grouped with piano and percussion. So if you think about double bass with piano and percussion, you've got this nice section, particularly when the double bass is playing pizzicato. It's really, really effective, and I think the master of this kind of scoring is David Maslanka. David, and I talked to him once on this years and years ago. Double bass was probably, he said, one of the instruments that took him the longest time to really make his own, to really fully understand it. And you look at his stuff, it's that combination of double bass and piano, and they just work together as this great little consort of things. How high do most standard bass parts go? Are they more or less flexible than tubas in each register? I play a little of both in my high school concert and jazz band, but I'm not an expert on either. So right off the bat, I am not a double bass player. I am not a string player of any kind. Um, that said, I mean, standard orchestral literature is going up to a written G4 or A4. That's not going to be too much of an issue. Um, a a good bass player should be able to do that. A D G. I mean, so even on the G string, that's only going up an octave in a second, up to B flat. Even is an octave and a third. The double bass solo from Mahler 1 goes up to a written B flat 4, so sounding B flat 3. I think anything in that is within the realm of possibility. I mean, that gives you a little bit over an octave on the upper string there. And playing an octave on a string should not be terribly difficult. In fact, good players could theoretically go another octave further still. It's rare to see treble clef for basses, except for harmonics. Yes. Double basses absolutely do harmonics. In fact, that's how double basses tune. Double basses actually tune their harmonics rather than tune their fundamentals. Just because it puts the pitch, the natural harmonic, I should say, it puts the pitch up much higher and easier for them to hear. Interestingly, there's some debate on double bass notation, in that some double bass players would prefer saying just bass and treble clef and not deal with tenor clef at all. But the standard is bass, tenor, and then move on to treble, and with tenor being probably the least used. Bassoon double bass is great. I've got a bassoon and double bass duet that I'm supposed to be playing soon and recording. From my experience, unless it's pits and you have another hard artificial harmonic, are tough. Another hand artificial harmonic are tough. Natural open harmonics are easy though. Natural harmonics on double basses are really easy. The last string piece I scored, I use natural harmonics all over the place, and they're super easy and they cut through, and they're natural harmonics and the double bass are great, but artificial harmonics are not easy. I mean, even moving a step on the double bass is like this big or something. It's People use sono reale when writing natural harmonics on the bass, by the way. I always get confused with that. You can. I mean, you would need, if you're doing that though, you would need to write those words. Otherwise, I don't think changing transpositions within a piece is a good idea for any instrument. Bass clarinet players deal with this all the time when going back and forth between French notation and German notation. There's no reason the double bass part should. Let's see. So there's been an interesting move lately to not just have one double bass, but a lot of larger ensembles are moving to have two double basses, and I actually really kind of like this move. A single double bass doesn't hold its own with against the big band, but two double basses has more of a fighting chance. So a lot of places, I know University of North Texas Wind Symphony's moved to two. I think the Eastman Wind Ensemble has moved to two. Michigan's moved to two. So a lot of the big universities have moved to two double basses in their ensembles, and it just adds a little bit firmer foundation. Uh, aren't harmonics typically notated with open note heads or like triangles? More diamond pitch. Yeah, they're diamond shaped, but they'll write the sounding pitch and not the written pitch sometimes. Yeah, they shouldn't, but they do. Yeah, the large distance covered makes bass a nice instrument for pitch bending, ornaments, and effects. What about an electric double bass? I've seen it before. I think though, if you're going to be using the electric, you really just kind of want a regular old electric bass. Just a Fender or something. Right, right. It's confusing, and that's why it shouldn't be done. But anyway, so yeah, all these big universities and a lot of the more prominent ensembles have started moving towards using two basses, and it's a move I quite like. And I took that into consideration when I was working on Symphony 3. I said, man, all these big ensembles are using two double basses. I'm going to go ahead and VC my bass part. So I've got two double basses in there. And it just adds a little firmer foundation down on the bottom. It's great. If you're scoring for two basses, I would go ahead and if the second bass, I would throw the runner out. No, sorry, baseball joke. No, second base, I would go ahead and think that they might have the low C extension, but probably not the first base. I know a lot of jazz players have pickups on their double basses. It sounds pretty good. Oh yeah. But you don't really you don't need that in the concert situation. The reason that the jazz players have that is a lot of time, well, because remember the double bass is the only bass instrument in the jazz band, and if they're using using the acoustic instrument and with a big band, a lot of times it just won't cut. So that's just the reason there. But in a wind ensemble, you don't really need it. Well, yeah, it uses a pickup because it can't compete with the four tubas. Well, there's your problem, four tubas. Putting a PCO pickup on a double bass has been normal for jazz players since, yeah. Yeah, I've seen solid body electric bass, or solid body double bass. And yeah. That presents problems of nasty feedback if you're not careful, though. Learn that the hard way. It's not too hard to set up your amp to avoid, though. Yeah, but again, we're getting into that feel. If you're using the amp there, unless it's, I mean, so there are pieces out there that have called for amplified bass. And they're doing that for a very specific effect. Say you want to run a pedal through it or you want to do some effects. But to me, it'd be along the same lines of having an amp there for your low flutes, anything below the alto flute. It's there, it's done. It's a symptom, though, to me, of bad scoring, unless you're doing it for a very specific effect. But yeah, the more and more I learn, and the more I study, and the more I write, I am moving toward using the double bass, and I think it's the pizzicato that just really seals it. That what it can do, just boom, and then just kind of fade away. It's just that it's this extra ictus on the low end that wouldn't be there for many of the other instruments. It's this soft sound, and it's absolutely perfect to use. All right, so we've been talking nearly 30 minutes. Let's go ahead and move on to a bit more controversial subject and talk about cellos in the wind ensemble. Now, I know this has been brought up several times before on here about using cellos. There's always room for cello. Uh, so the concept of using cellos in the wind band dates back at least into the early 1800s. Uh, Berlioz's Funeral and Triumphal Symphony, um, with the string additions, the cellos and basses go ahead and play in the first movement. They're tacit in movement 2, and then all the strings come in movement 3. Okay, unrelated question. Do you prefer the term double bass, upright bass, string bass, contrabass, or simply bass? I know it's historically been referred to as a lot of things. Okay, this is not an unrelated question. This is absolutely a pertinent question, and one that I should answer. So, my default in the score is I call it a bass. Um, So yeah, I just write bass in there. I don't actually in writing like the term double bass. It's a linguistic consistency thing for me. I don't use double bassoon. Why should I use double bass? And so yeah, why is it double bass? I am not fully sure on um, the the answer to why it's called a double bass, and that's it's a weird issue. But yeah, no, within my own scores, I just say bass, and I don't say double bass. And that's more in line with other languages. So if you go and look at a German score, it's just Bassa. And same, you might see Contrabassa, but yeah, I just use bass. And that's what people are going to call it anyway. What do you play? I play the bass. Okay. So yeah, that's another unconvincing explanation I've heard is that it is that instead twice as big as cello. It's a cello, which isn't true. Um, so at one point, yes, it was. Um, so the original violones. So the violone, it was the predecessor of the double bass, and it was more or less an octave below the cello. It went down to D, and so it was D A or a D G something, and I'd have to look at my. It was double the size of the bass viol, and that's exactly right. It was double the size of the bass viol. And so the bass viol's lowest note was D2. The violone was lowest note was D1. It was double the bass viol. But the large viol was a violone, which means big viola or big viol. But anyway, yeah. So yeah, it's a can of worms. You can call it double bass. The ones I would not call it, I would not call it string bass. That's more of a colloquial term. I would not call it upright bass, but bass, double bass, or contrabass are the accepted terms. All right, so let's move back to cello. So yes, cello has been in and out of wind bands since the 1800s, early 1800s. A really classic piece of wind chamber music is the Dvorak's Serenade for Winds, which is a wind piece, but it also has in it a cello and a double bass. So those instruments are there, and am I remembering correctly that our bass today is kind of a hybrid between the violin and viol family instruments? Yes, you are absolutely correct there. Um, so since we keep getting pushed to viols, let's go ahead and just differentiate between what a violin family instrument is and a viol family instrument. So viols or viola da gambas are a different family of string instruments. What's interesting is the viols were the aristocratic instruments, whereas the violins were the people's instruments. And at some point during the Baroque era, that changed, and the violins became the predominant ones, and the viols went away. So violins are with four strings tuned in fifths. So they have fifth string. So a violin is G, D, A, E from low to high. And I'm always going to refer to them as low to high, but string players evidently always refer to them as high to low, which just confuses the crap out of me. But anyway, so the violins are tuned in fifths. They have a rounded back. They have the F tone hole in there, and they have no frets on the fingerboard. Viols have six strings, or in the case of some late bass viols, will have seven. They're tuned in fourths with 1/3 in the middle, basically like a guitar. They have a flat back, and they all have frets. So the double bass has the strings tuned in fourths. So, but every other characteristic is that of a violin family. So it's got the rounded back. It's got a fretless fingerboard. The only difference is it does have the sloping sides, but that's an ergonomic issue. The sloping sides are there so the player can actually reach up onto the fingerboard. Sorry that this isn't completely on topic. Are all orchestral strings, violins or double bass, the same terms of fingering, just different pitches? Are they completely different? They are going to be different. Violin and viola will use the same technique. One's just a fifth lower. Cello will use a different technique because instead of the hand being here, the hand is now here. And so it means the cello player can now use the thumb. Double bass will use a different technique completely. And because it's tuned in fourths and not fifths. On the topic of instrument families, have you near of Hutchinson's new violin family with 8 uniform members tuned in fifths from a violin, an octave up to double bass? Yes, yes. And we'll talk about those in a little bit once we get through viola and violin. But yes, there's going to be a full chapter in volume 4 on that. And I'm mostly through writing that chapter now. But anyway, so back to cello. All right, so back to cello. There are a lot of European traditions that use cellos within their wind ensembles. Particularly Spanish wind ensembles will use cellos pretty frequently. And that is also seen a lot in some Latin American, particularly you see it in some big Mexican wind ensembles. You might also see it in some Italian wind ensembles. And so, and then there's one ensemble in the U.S. that by default has cellos in it. And most people don't realize this, but the United States Air Force Band, and it's only the Air Force Band in Washington, D.C. They have in their ensemble 2 cellos, maybe 3 cellos, depending on what the enlistment is. But yeah, they've got a section of cellos, so like 2 or 3 cellos, and then 2 double basses, and those are part of the U.S. Air Force Band. And you will see The music that is commissioned for the Air Force Band will always have cello parts in them. A really classic example of this is the piece Dance Movements by Philip Spark. If you don't know Dance Movements, it is just an absolutely phenomenal piece of orchestration and writing for the wind band, but it does have a pretty prominent cello part. When I performed it, of course, we didn't have cellos, but c'est la vie. Yeah, Griffin, we'll talk the all that stuff here in just a little bit. I have all that stuff planned out to talk about, so you just sit and be patient. So anyway, so yeah, if you ever play any music that was written for the U.S. Air Force Band, it will have a cello part in it. Interestingly enough, and I've talked to him on this, Johann de May has made the move to include cello in all of his major wind orchestra pieces. He doesn't like using the term band anymore, so he just calls it a wind orchestra. And cellos have become a standard instrument for him. And it does change the timbre of the band, and I think the band becomes a little bit more gentle. Can I say the name of that piece and composer again? Dance Movements by Philip Sparke. Sparke. Absolutely phenomenal tour de force band writing. As far as cellos go, which instruments do you think blend with them best? I think clarinets and bassoons are ideal candidates to competent its tenor voice. I mean, let's face it, any instrument's going to blend with cello. It's a blending instrument. They just, that's what they do. They blend. So it's one of those. It's a supporting character. It's not your star. As a violist, the acoustical deficiencies add to the unique character of the instrument, and by fixing them, it just makes a new instrument, not a better viol. Yeah, that's true, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. Oh, no wonder I can't see the screen. But anyway, so yeah, I don't ever think that cello is going to become a standard member of the American Wind Ensemble, but it's out there, and there are composers using it, and I think it will make for an interesting an interesting tone color to play with. And I played with it when I was working on Symphony 3, and I said, I'm going to just include... Yeah, I think I say 2 or 4 cellos in the part. So it can be used 2 or 4. I think I prefer 4, but so I have a section of 4 cellos and 2 basses, and just have this nice lush bottom there. Alto bass clarinet and cello duet could allow both of them to shine while having their blending moments. So, yeah, and there's so many possibilities with it. It really works well, and by just having 2 of them, you're not adding this full section. But let's talk about a piece that does add a full section of double basses and a full section of cellos to what is essentially a wind ensemble. Did David Maslanka ever use it? I know he talked about people using it for Symphony 4 in a blog post of his. I don't think David ever had a specific cello part in any of his wind ensemble music. I could be wrong on that. There may be something in one of his pieces like the Requiem or the Mass, but off the top of my head, I don't think I know he didn't in any of the symphonies. Yeah, the tenor section of the band always needs expanding. Absolutely correct, and that helps it out a lot. Um, where does it go? Oh yeah, the piece there is a well-known piece that uses a full section of double basses and uh, cellos, and that's Stravinsky's Symphony of Psalms. And I think some people's heads may have just exploded that I call that a band piece. Well, I mean, think about it. It doesn't have violins, it doesn't have violas, but it's got basically it's all winds and low strings. That's a wind band. So Stravinsky's Symphony of Psalms, and it has a big wind section, although it doesn't have any clarinets, which is very odd. But it's an odd piece. And the violins and violas are replaced by two pianos. But yeah, there's this double bass and cello section there, and it's a fantastic piece. But of course, if you've heard Symphony of Psalms, you know it's a fantastic piece. And that's a Stravinsky piece I just forget about all the time and forget how awesome it is. But yeah. Okay, now let's move on. We're going to talk violin and viola together. Viola is going to be kind of the odd man out because I don't know any band piece that actually calls for viola in it. And I think it may be the only string instrument of the four that really has never featured into the wind ensemble. By the way, have you heard of John Franson? I think he's writing a concerto for violin, viola, and wind ensemble for a college next year. I have not heard of him, but the next thing I was going to say is that there are going to be some viola concertos or concertant works with winds that would qualify for that, but never as a member of the ensemble. The idea is an opposite of a double wind concerto. Okay. Or actually, you'll have to tell me more about it at some point. But, so yeah, viola is just kind of like, okay, yeah, we don't need it. And it's not a voice that the wind band really needs. Violins, on the other hand, interestingly, there are a few pieces out there that will call for violins. And again, we'll stretch the definition of wind band, but if we look at something like the original scoring, the jazz band scoring of George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, he has 8 violins, but then everything else is winds and percussion and double bass. So, I mean, that I've not seen Rhapsody done by a wind band, but I have seen the second Rhapsody done by the wind band. What's my opinion on the use of alto clef? C clef, rock on. I'm always a fan of C clef. I think it needs to be used more. I just finished doing a run of singing the Messiah, and I kept wanting my tenor part to be in tenor clef. I have a lot of underdog symphony for the violas in the orchestra setting, but yeah, that mezzo-soprano range just isn't needed in a wind band. Yeah, it's not, really. What's the line between a wind band and a wind-heavy orchestra? A violin and viola section, essentially. If there's a violin and a viola section, it moves to being an orchestra. If you take the violins and the violas out, and leave double basses, cellos there, you're in a hybrid area, kind of, but more or less it functions more like a wind band because all of your upper voices are all winds. So yeah, with violins, you've got things like the Gershwin Rhapsody in Blue. So yeah, you've got this small section of 8 violins, but everything else is a bunch of wind players. So it's much more wind band like. I suppose the difference lies whether you have a large section of strings or simply a couple of players, and the addition of saxophones and euphoniums. Um, yes, though there are some orchestral works that do have saxophones and euphoniums. If you look at the works of Joseph Holbrook, why is the highest clef called French violin clef? I have no clue. It probably has to do with the court of Louis XIV, the Sun King, who had a consort of violins. I have a question. I was wondering if you can answer it. Sure, I guess. Uh, yeah. But anyway, so yeah, violin. I've done a few pieces. There is a piece by Adam Gorb, I believe, that has has a pretty important violin part in it. With wind band that I think can alternately be done on a C clarinet. Yiddish Dances. That's it. Yiddish Dances by, I think that's Adam Gorb. Um, and that's a violin part. There's a Gunther Schuller violin concerto, but concerti don't really count. Um, but yeah. Okay. So, let's see. Let's move on to the violin octet. No, before we move on to the violin octet, let me make one possible case for the inclusion of a small section of violins. Um, okay, here's Wild's question. In my wind ensemble, we're playing pieces such as Lincolnshire Posy for Suite in E flat. In all these pieces, I am always being used as a tenor voice. I play bass clarinet. Is this common? Um, okay, so First Suite in E flat does not have a bass clarinet part. That is something you should know right off the bat. The bass clarinet part was a later addition. Most of the bass clarinet part in that piece is actually from the baritone part that was discarded by the publishers. Not the euphonium part, but an actual baritone part. Because they have the same transposition, a lot of the part was just copy and pasted into that. Lincolnshire Posy, though, you should be playing mostly the bass line there. Because Granger knew what he was doing. Granger also asked that there be 6 bass clarinets and 6 alto clarinets in that piece. So, yeah, you don't need to play the bass clarinet part in First Suite in E flat because there is none. And, but conversely, Lincolnshire Posy, you need more bass clarinet friends. All right, I find the parallels between the violin octet and the old mandolin orchestras. Okay, yeah, we'll get to that. Let me make one case for a small group of violins in a wind band. So there's one thing a wind band cannot do, and I don't know of a way for this to even happen. The one thing a wind band cannot do is play very softly in the upper range. So what I'd be talking about is something basically C6 on up. Yeah, that's what you're doing. You're doubling the bassoon. That's what you're there for. Trust Percy Granger on that. He knew what he was doing. So anyway, so the wind band cannot do this extreme high soft stuff. What would be interesting would be to have a section of 4 violins and that was just there to really have this very soft, high, ethereal sound that no wind instrument can do. And I've run into this multiple times. Like, man, I want an instrument that can do this, but I mean, at some point we've only got flutes and we've only got the piccolo that can actually even play those notes. And as they go higher and higher, they get louder and louder, unlike the violins, which get softer and softer. This is one reason that transcriptions from orchestra to wind band almost never work well. They work, but, not well. Okay, that said, violin octet. Okay, so the violin octet was an idea spawned by the composer Henry Brandt. Brandt has a great orchestration text if you can find it. What is the name of Brandt's book? It's Textures, Ratchet. I know you know what it is. Just type it in the comments. What is the name of Brandt's orchestration book? But anyway, he had this idea that, you know, the modern strings, the four string instruments that we use are largely unbalanced with each other. You've got okay, while we are talking strings, I'll answer this last question. But yeah, we're trying to dedicate this one to strings. How bass clarinet is a standard member of the orchestra. It's the bass member of the clarinet section. Textures and timbres. Yes, thank you. That's it. That's one I need to get it. I don't have it in my collection yet. Okay, so anyway, so Brandt had this idea to have a match set, just like you would see in the saxophone family. You have sopranino, soprano, alto, tenor, baritone, bass. Well, Brandt said, well, why can't we do that with violins? And so he brought up this idea, and he started talking to the luthier, Hutchins. Oh God, what's her name? First name. It's Charlene Carlene. Just a second. I got to bring up my draft of Volume 4 real quick. I was on that right page. It's Carlene Hutchins. I don't know why I have to. So yeah, Carlene Hutchins was the luthier, who took the idea and started designing them. And her idea was to use a Stradivarius violin as the basis. And so that was the first instrument. And then scale all the instruments appropriately. So that was called the mezzo violin. And we'll just go down from there. The next size down was the alto violin, which is the same pitch as the viola. But the thing about the alto violin is it is considerably larger than a viola. And so, instead of holding it like you would hold a viola out here, you hold it like a cello in between your legs on a long end pin. So it looks like a tiny cello, but it's the same pitch as the viola. And one of the added advantages of it is it has a massively bigger sound than the viola. It doesn't have that kind of scratchy quality that violas have because it's proportionately sized correctly. But it does have to be played on the end pin. The next size down is the tenor violin, and this to me is the most intriguing of the members of the violin octet. This is the missing tenor voice in the string ensemble. It's one octave lower than the violin. So it's tuned to G, D, A, E, lowest G on the... a viola would be 22 inches long, the body, to be the same as violin acoustically. Yes, and a big viola is a 16-inch viola. A lot of players will use a 14-inch viola. And so, yeah, it's that much bigger. So it's 6 to 8 inches bigger than most violas in the body. Size does matter. But, so yeah, the tenor violin is to me the most intriguing and it's the instrument that has been left out of the string ensemble, something between the viola and the cello. Kind of like the tenor saxophone. And what I would love to see is an orchestra that would have, first violin, second violin, viola or alto violins, and then a section of tenor violins, and then your cellos, and then the basses. And you add that sixth section into the string section, and just think about how much richer your sound becomes. But the scratchiness and rawness of the viola is my favorite part. More rustic sound, much more beautiful and characteristic than the other strings, in my opinion. Similar thing with the contrapunto and the contraforte. Actually, I don't think it's along the same lines as the contrapunto and the contraforte. It's just, the viola is just undersized. And the problem with that is it doesn't have a lot of projection, which is... And yes, that characteristic tone quality is fantastic to deal with, but I think you could probably get, if you did a section, so say you have 8 violas, have 5 on viola and 3 on alto violin, put the alto violins at the back, their sound's now going to come forward and just kind of beef it up, but you're still going to get the tone of the violas. Now think about that as a possibility, and I think that could be really interesting. And you could also switch back and forth between the timbres of the alto violin and the viola. Oh man, this would be fantastic to play with these kind of timbres. But anyway, yeah. And then have that nice section of tenor violins there. And then you get down with the violin octet to the baritone violin, which is a violin-shaped cello. So the cello is roughly about this deep. The baritone violin is only about this deep. So it's much shallower. But evidently for the people who play the baritone violins... it has a considerable amount of projection. That said, you're not going to find a lot of differences, I think, tone-wise between a baritone violin and a cello. By the way, have you heard of Parch's adapted viola? It's the same tuning as the tenor violin, I think. The last I really did any study of Parch was probably... 99 or 2000, and I remember reading about it back then, but it's been a long time. Oh yeah, I think that would be a good solution. My orchestra conductor is always telling the back desk violins to play out more depth in the sound, and a difference in timbre too would be good. Yeah, and I think that would be a great solution there. Okay, so let's continue on with the octet. So we got the baritone violin, which is just a violin-shaped cello. Now, there are 2 more sizes. Actually, there are 3 more because it's now not a violin octet, it's a violin nonet. And so the next size down has a name issue. Because we call it a baritone, the next logical name would probably be bass, but for whatever reason they call it small bass or bassetto, which... I think it's kind of stupid, and I think you probably should also just drop the name baritone and call this the great bass. But anyway, so this is where we get into some issues in tuning. So there's the cello tuning. The cello tuning of the small bass is in fifths, starting on G, D, A, E. So 2 octaves below the violin. This is actually a really fantastic sounding instrument. It's rich. Think of it as like a contralto clarinet to the bass clarinet. It's just a much richer and deeper cello. The other tuning, though, is a double bass-like tuning, tuned in fourths, A, D, G, B. So a fourth above the double bass. And that's tuned in fourths. That's more for double bass players to play. So there's a cello-like tuning and there's a double bass-like tuning. And then you've got the contrabass. And again, there are two different versions. One is the contrabass that uses standard double bass tuning, EADG. Or there's the true version, which is uh, in fifth, C, G, D, A. And surprisingly, the principal bass of the Fort Worth Symphony plays on contrabass violin. So tuned in fifths down to C, and I think that's his primary instrument, or it was at least a few years ago. But huge power, a huge instrument. I mean, most bass players play on what's called a 3/4 size bass. And occasionally you might see someone playing on a 7/8 bass, which will be a really big instrument. But these are full 4/4 instruments. Now, there is one more, and it is a much more recent creation. It's not part of the original design, but the luthier Robert Spear has created a sub-contrabass violin. And again, I think there are actually three different tunings on his sub-contrabass. So one is taking the double bass tuning and tuning it down a fourth. So B, E, A, D. B, E, A, D. The other tuning, you can also do that down a step, so down to A, A, D, G, C. But the other one that I think is cooler is, again, 3 octaves lower than the violin. So G, it would be G0, D, G, D, A, and E. And that would be a massive instrument. So, I mean, think about adding a pair of those onto the end of your double bass section. So say you have 8 double basses and then 2 subcontrabass violins. Rich and meaty. Now, of course, I started on the mezzo violin. So Yo-Yo Ma used an alto violin for Bartók's Viola Concerto, apparently for recording too. I have that recording somewhere. I'd have to track it down, but I do have that recording. I have that CD. So off the end of the piano, yes. I've noticed that violins and violas are both C instruments, yet they're only a fifth apart. Is treble clef? Is treble clef in a different key than alto and bass with the string family? No, everybody reads concert pitch strings. That's just kind of how it's done. Transposing instruments are very much a wind instrument only thing, except with some of these violin octet instruments. So let's talk about we're going to go back to the mezzo, which is the regular violin, and then we're going to go up. So the next one up is no, viola is not an F instrument. No. Viola is a C instrument. If anything, think about the violin as being the transposing instrument. Viola came first. Remember, violin means little viola. Anyway, so we've got the mezzo, and then we go up to the soprano violin, and its lowest string is middle C, so it's a fourth higher. This is an old idea going back to the Baroque era of the violino piccolo, and we see the violino piccolo in something like Bach's Brandenburg Concerto number 1. But what he's using there is an instrument tuned a minor third up. So if we think about the violin being in G, this is now an instrument in B flat. Or if we think of the violin in C, it's an instrument in E flat. But that's I lost my train of thought. Thanks, Ratchet, for bringing up carillons again. But yeah, anyway, so the modern soprano violin, it is a fourth higher, and for a long time this was thought to be about the highest you could make one. Um, it's a much clearer and brighter sounding instrument than the regular violin. And if we take a string orchestra, I would not want a full section of soprano violins. I think if you had in a large string section, if you had only four, they'd cut right through. You don't need it any more than that. And I think it would be just fine. But the pinnacle is the treble violin, which is really a true piccolo violin, one octave higher than normal. This is a tiny instrument, and for a long time was considered impossible to build, and this was because of materials technology. The strings had to be made out of basically everybody says space age material, and I want to think it's some form of carbon fiber. Someone may be able to correct me on that, but it is a stupidly tiny instrument with extremely high string tension. So does this mean that string instruments don't really have a set tuning key apart from four strings, which are all different keys? Uh, well, I mean, no, you don't think of it's not a violin in C. It's not a violin in B flat. It's just the violin. Um, have we talked about how the cello part in American Overture for Band is almost never played? No, I don't know that piece in particular. Who wrote that, bassoonist? That would tell me a lot. And I bet that that particular piece was written for the U.S. Air Force Band. And that's probably going to be the case. If I would almost bet it's something like Barnes, James Barnes. But anyway, yeah. So the treble violin is very, very high. There's a couple people in the world who've managed to really take it and make it their own instrument. If you were to use it in an orchestra, you'd only want one or two. Probably just one, and that would be you would treat it just like you would treat the piccolo in the band. Just one player, all you need, doing the fiddly high stuff. Literally fiddly. Okay, Joseph Wilcox Jenkins. My guess, bassoonist. If you look, if do me a favor, look that up. United States Army Field Band. Interesting. That's weird. I never knew the Army actually used cellos. I wonder if he did an arrangement of it so that the Air Force Band could play it. I bet that's the case, is that the cello part was added in there so that the Air Force Band could play it. And that would be the easiest solution there, which would mean that the cello part is probably not vital. Though, again, I could be wrong because I don't know the piece. Okay, so let's go all the way down to the very bottom end. And let's talk the octo bass. Okay, the octo bass is a very unusual instrument in that nobody can agree on what it actually is. And there are several instruments out there. And there are three wildly different tuning systems for the octo bass. Huh, I'll have to look that up, Ratchet. It's unusual. So the octo bass originally, and we are 100% confirmed in this, was originally tuned to C1, G1, D2. That's the C at the bottom of the piano. It was not an octave lower than the double bass. It was an octave lower than the cello. And Hector Berlioz is very, very explicit in his description of the instrument in the Treatise on Instrumentation. And he says, contrary to what most people believe, it is not an octave lower than the double bass. It is an octave lower than the cello. Great. Except it's still a 12-foot tall double bass. I'm going to the Musical Instrument Museum in Arizona next week, and I'm going to be able to see the octave bass there. Yes, I have seen that octave bass. It is phenomenal. If you've never been there, that is the most overwhelming museum I have ever been in. And I've been in a lot of museums, mostly to see dinosaurs, and that is by far the coolest museum I have ever been in. Anyway, so yeah, the octave bass. So the Musical Instrument Museum is the key culprit in us thinking that the instrument is a giant behemoth to play down low. Because their instrument, they tune an octave lower than it's supposed to be. So C0, G0, and D1. You have a maximum of 3 days. You can see the whole thing if in one day. But there's a lot to see there. I only spent an afternoon there. Would an octave bass be more practical than a sub-contrabass tuba? Yes. The physics are more practical because human lips can't vibrate down that low. I wonder why the octave bass only has 3 strings. That's all well, I don't know. That's kind of just how they were built. I'm not sure if the tension of a 4th string could be supported. You are dealing with a tremendous amount of weight on those strings, and it very well could be that if you put a 4th string on there, the bridge will collapse. I just don't know. So yeah, the mem instrument is tuned an octave lower than normal, but they did that for a very specific reason, and they did that so that they could teach about string acoustics. And so you could actually see the vibrations on the lowest string of the octave bass. And use that as a visual demonstration. They could teach harmonics that way. And so that works. It's not meant to be a performing instrument. Now, there is a 3rd system of octave bass used, and this is the Montreal system. The Montreal Symphony Orchestra now owns an octave bass. They are the only symphony orchestra in the world to have one, and theirs is tuned with the lowest string of A. So it's A0, E1, B1. And this is what they have used in their concerts, and they will use it every now and then. But here's the cool thing about Montreal. They have on order 2 more octave basses, meaning that they are going to have 3 octave basses in their orchestra. And I just cannot imagine the wall of sound that will come through that orchestra with 3 octave basses. Didn't Berlioz include octave bass in his treatise and recommend for all orchestras? He included it in his treatise. Yes, he did not recommend it for all orchestras. He recommended it for festival orchestras, for very large orchestras. He realized the practicality that it's not an instrument you need for small orchestras. Have there been any pieces written for it? Yes, Montreal has commissioned at least one piece. I believe the name of the piece is a Cello Rondo. If you just look up the Montreal Symphony Orchestra, a Cello Rondo, and the composer is he's Hispanic. I want to think he's Peruvian, but I could be wrong. The subcontra register having another instrument in use might be cool if money didn't exist. So theirs goes down a fifth below regular bass. Exactly right. Yeah, still tuned in fifths. The octobasses have to be tuned in fifths, but yeah. So it's the lowest A on the piano for their octobass. What their other two octobasses will be tuned at, I do not know. They were supposed to take delivery of those octobasses several months ago. I have not heard anything since then. It could be a delay in building. I have tried to follow that as closely as possible. Yes, Jose Evangelista, that's the composer. Yeah, and you should be able to find a recording of the piece on YouTube, and it opens up with an octobass solo. And it's so far really the only piece that has used the octobass musically, and there's Leslie, welcome. We just spent probably about 20 minutes talking about the violin octet. Maybe more than that. I would love to see some of those instruments getting used in the standard orchestra. But whether they will or not, I don't know. Probably not because tradition. All right, so let's move on to viols, and this is getting into the realm of period music, historical music. So viols. Essentially, we've got four sizes of viol, though there are some intermediates. I've recently pitched a double bass down a fourth, and it sounds kind of like an octobass, but not as deep. Since then, it's now my favorite member of the family. Maybe in a couple years, a subcontrabass and octocontrabass clarinet and octobass can form their own section of mighty low instruments. I mean, yeah, who knows? Jared, if you're still watching, I'm sure you can chime in on that. But anyway, yeah, there's the problem with the Hutchins consort stuff is I wish they would do some original works for the consort instead of arrangements. I think that would give a much better idea of what those instruments can do. Maybe I'll write something for them. Who knows? Maybe that's not a bad idea. Who knows? But anyway, so viols. So viols basically went out of fashion by about 1750, by the end of the Baroque era. Bach was still using them. There's viola da gamba sonatas. There's lots of viola da gamba parts in the passions and the cantatas. But he was really one of the last composers to be using it. In Germany. In France, it would last a little bit longer. You've got Marin Moret, who is the viola da gamba virtuoso. By the way, viola da gamba and viol are synonyms with each other. Viola da gamba just means viol of the legs because it was held between the legs. And so in consort playing, there were three main sizes. The standard was the bass viol. And if you ever see a part that just says viola da gamba, it's the bass viol. It's essentially about the same size as a cello. Most were 6-string instruments. Some had a 7th string. Late French instruments would have a 7th string. Then above that, yes. When did OAE put that out? If it was in like the last hour. Yeah, I'm interested in both the octet and viol family, but not so much in music that was just meant to amuse horrible aristocrats. Well, I mean, if let's be fair, most classical music was there to amuse aristocrats. I mean, the early wind band music was all for aristocrats. So, I mean, there's you pick your battles. You just take the music for what it is and just kind of ignore the historical connotation. I know there's still at least one manufacturer of vials now. Oh yeah. You can get you can get Chinese made vials, and that's interesting. That you can go get a cheap viola da gamba from a Chinese luthier, and if you set them up properly, they're fine. I mean, they're not something you'd want to be recording solo music on, but for a student or a learning instrument, they should be okay. Um, so yeah, so from the bass viol, the next one up is the tenor viol, which is about the same range as the viola. Its lowest string is A. Um, so it would be a minor third lower than the lowest string of the viola. The tenor viol was always written in alto clef, and then you had the treble viol, and its lowest string was D, and it was essentially about the same range as the violin, even though its lowest string is just a step above the viola. Great point, but the concerts were kind of defined by the exclusivity. Yes, but the consorts weren't. So, Sweeter, I would suggest then go and find music for the Par de Sous, the Viola de Par de Sous. Um, that was a small viola da gamba that was played by the ladies. It was specifically for females to play, and so that they could play the popular dance music of the day on viola da gamba. So par dessus, and don't ask me to spell that. I don't think I can right now. And yet, still no Sarrusophone manufacturers. Hey, if you pay Benedict Eppelsheimer enough, he will. What about the viola d'amore? Okay, let's finish up the viols real quick. So you've got those three standard sizes of viol. I mentioned the Par de Sous, which is a smaller one. Is the viola considered an alto or tenor instrument? Well, we're talking about the modern viola. It's an alto. I mean, the name in French for the viola is literally just alto. The OAE's video, it made it seem like the viols were capable of playing chords. Yeah, that's exactly what they were for. A lot of potential for contemporary solo and chamber works. Would I ever return to the MIM in the future? Oh, absolutely. Next time I'm in Arizona, I will go there. I just haven't been to Arizona in a couple of years. Typically, when I go to Arizona, it's always for bird watching, and so the MIM is just a side trip. But fun fact: Arizona, some of the best bird watching in the United States. But anyway, so there was an alto viol. It was pitched a step above the tenor, or maybe a minor third above the tenor, or a step below the treble. And then there are two larger, what are called violones. So the violone, yes, they have frets. The big violone that everybody thinks about is called the D violone, and its lowest note is the D1. But there's also a G violone, and the G violone was in between the bass viol and the violone. And so what's interesting is the G violone and the D violone were essentially the same instrument, just with different strings. So you could take a set of D violone strings and put it on your G instrument, and you could take a set of G violone strings and put it on your D instrument. And it's just about what strings you had on there. And of course, all the strings are gut strings, made out of sheep's gut. Sorry to going back to older topics, but yes, I saw that video yesterday. Um, I wish they had talked about the fact that that is not the historically correct tuning of the octo bass. Um, but yeah, Rob Scanlon's videos are always fun. I enjoy those videos. I would love it if he did talk about some wind instruments more, but I know that's not his area. He's a guitar player, so. But yeah, um, so we talked viols. Viola d'amore was brought up. Okay, Viola d'amore is interesting. We don't actually know where the name came from for Viola d'amore. My favorite is it's it literally means viola of the Moors, which would mean the Moors, of course, were the Spanish Muslims. And what a viola d'amore is a 6 or 7 string instrument with another 6 or 7 sympathetic strings tuned exactly the same underneath the fingerboard. And it's a very, very complex instrument. So it basically has 14 strings on it, 7 of which you play on, 7 of which vibrate sympathetically. And it is an absolutely gorgeous instrument. If you want to find a great piece to listen to of it, find the Hindemith Sonata for Viola d'amore. And you can just really hear it used in a contemporary setting, and he's playing around a lot with the tone colors of that particular instrument. I always felt the qualities that make viols bad for unamplified music could make them great instruments for playing with family and neighbors. Well, yeah, was kind of the point. It was meant to be played in a very small setting. Now, interestingly, there is one piece of music that I think would actually be so much better if performed on viols as opposed to on violins, and it would be the Fantasia on Themes of Thomas Tallis by Rafe Vaughan Williams. So the Vaughan Williams piece is for string orchestra, small string orchestra, and string quartet. And I think that if they did the string quartet parts on viols, oh my God, would that be such a drastic tone color? And it's meant to represent that. So it would be absolutely fantastic to hear a recording of the Fantasia on Thomas Tallis with viols on the solo quartet part. Since some violin players put octave strings on violins to make them an octave lower, are there any viola players who do the same except an octave higher? No. I don't think a viola can't take the tension on those strings. You can always put a lower tension string on an instrument. It becomes much more difficult to put a higher tension string on an instrument. You will break the instrument by doing that. Using the notes with sympathetic strings to contrast the notes without sympathetic strings could be cool. Yeah, and you get into a lot of potentials with scoring. Interestingly, someone who really did a lot of scoring with the viola d'amore was Bernard Herrmann. And there were several Twilight Zone episodes, the original Twilight Zone, where I think like the ensemble was vibraphone, harp, and viola d'amore. And that was what they used for the whole episode. I would love to find the scores of that, or just the soundtrack to it, just to kind of listen to it. But Bernard Herrmann used the viola d'amore quite a bit. And it's interesting that you do see viola d'amore parts pop up. There's a piece from Janacek, and I can't remember which piece it is that has a viola d'amore part. There's a viola d'amore part in the Prokofiev piece. But yeah, you see it popping up. Hindemith wrote probably the most music for viola d'amore because he was a violist and he was interested in all those really cool, weird instruments. Which is why, the greatest Heckelphone piece is a Hindemith piece. Now, the viola d'amore has a much larger cousin, which is the baritone, Baryton, the German spelling, of course. And the baritone um, was essentially a cello-sized viola d'amore. Of course, held like this, and again, about 12 to 14 strings on it. Sympathetic. Joseph Haydn wrote quite a bit for the baritone. And I believe that's because Prince Esterhazy played it, and that was his employer. Do you ever add a harp part in your wind band music? Yes, there are major harp parts in Symphony 2, Symphony 3, and I'm trying to remember which. I know there's at least one of my tone poems that has harp in it, but yeah, harp is for professional wind band scoring. Harp is pretty accepted as standard. And we'll talk harp on one of these at some point. Harp is very difficult to deal with, and I am by no means a harp expert. I think even harp players aren't even experts sometimes. It's just it's a hard instrument. Looking on eBay, there are Chinese viola d'amores. Yeah, and probably not going to be um, too expensive, I don't think. Harp, yeah, harp sounds like a hard instrument to write for. It is probably the most difficult standard instrument to write for. Is the body depth of string instruments the factor of sound depthness, or is it string thickness? It's a combination of things. A lot of times it'll be the bass bar in it. It's there. It's string quality. It's construction. It's how big the resonating chamber is. There's no one thing that affects it, and so there's a lot of physics that go involved into there. Let's see. What else we're just going to talk bowed strings tonight. We're not going to go into our pluck strings, harps, guitars, mandolins, that stuff, because we got that lined up in the future. Yeah, so I'll take any questions on just general thoughts on adding strings to a wind ensemble, the limitations, possibilities, potential. I know some of you kind of really like that idea of having a very small section of violins to just add that extra upper sheen on the top end of the wind ensemble. I think it could be interesting. I mean, talking about all this stuff always gets my brain working, whether or not stuff works. I played Elsa's procession to the cathedral in my community band earlier this month, and the absence of the harp left a huge hole. Yeah, well, okay. I will say this right now. I do not like Elsa's procession to the cathedral. I know everybody says this is the best band transcription of all time. It's like, it's still a band transcription. The original Wagner's so much better. So, I mean, stop doing that. Get original music for your ensemble. Preserve the art. Don't steal other people's art. Yeah. No, the one time I've played it, maybe 2 violins sitting around the oboe. I would not do 2. I would do 3 or 3 or 4. 2, you're going to run into tuning issues. That said, I think putting them near the oboe would be interesting. I remember having a violin in our wind ensemble. Was that on purpose, or just because you had a violin player and you didn't have a place to do that? I played the E-flat clarinet part on Elsa's, and the part is horribly transcribed. Were you playing the Lucien Callier edition? If you were playing the Lucien Callier edition, I'll probably have to take umbrage there, because Callier literally wrote the book on how to score for clarinets. So he knew what he was doing with clarinets more than any single person. Oh, you're right. With the sound of two phasing versus cluster of four or more. Yeah. And that could be one of the limiting factors on why we haven't seen composers take. Could there be a place for a lower cello, a fourth lower in orchestras? So, like the bassetto or small bass in the violin octet, sure. So let's kind of rethink the orchestra. So let's start throwing some numbers out. Let's see, here's a pen here. Do I have a piece of paper handy? Is this something I can write on? Yeah, that's something I can write on. Okay, so I'm gonna do. Let's. Yeah, Puccolo, don't complain about Callier's writing for clarinet. Then he was literally the bass clarinetist in the Philadelphia Symphony Orchestra under Stokowski, and did Stokowski's arrangements for him. All right, so we're going to take our numbers of a string section. So big string section: 16 firsts, 14 seconds, 12 viola, 10 cello, and 8 bass. That's fairly standard. Okay, so I'm going to add up those numbers. 20, 30. All right, that's 60. Okay, so one of these days you should talk about everything on my shelf. This shelf here? You mean all the... those are all my orchestral band scores. That's a lot. Okay. What about issues of temperament for strings and wind ensemble playing? I know string players tend to be fluid with temperament, but I don't know the subject well. Just tell them to play in tune. Everybody tunes to the oboe. That's, I mean, regardless of if it's the orchestra or the wind band, you tune to the oboe. Okay, so we've got our big string ensemble is 60 players. So right off the bat, the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to start divvying up some numbers. I want one treble violin. I only want one of those because if I have two, we're going to get phasing issues, and 3 is too many. All the shelves are maybe just interesting selections. Oh, Lord, that would take a long time. A lot of that stuff is just stuff I printed off. Tuning is a novel concept to some people. Well, yeah. Okay, so we're going to take our string section of 60 players and divvy it up with new instruments. So one treble violin. I don't need any more than that. And I'm going to do 3 soprano violins. Maybe I'll do a whole video on this. Actually, I think this would be a really, really cool idea. All right, so 1 treble violin, 3 soprano violins. That's 4. Okay, cool. Let's go down to the other end. I've got... we're not going to deal with octo basses because they're not portable. There's only one in an orchestra in the world, and we're just not going to deal with it. So I started out with 8 basses. What if I do 6 basses and 4 of the small bass violins? And that's a total of 10 now in the bass section. I've upped the number there. And so I had 10 cellos. Well, I'm going to have that number. I'm going to go to 6 cellos and 6 tenor violins. So that's now 12. So 12, 10, and 4. I'm now up to 26. I think more videos are definitely warranted. The orchestra is in need of an overhaul, in my opinion. Yeah. So I've got 26 players now on tenor violin, cello, small bass violin, double bass, and then the high violins. And that gives me 24 left. Well, guess what? That's 8, 8, 8 for first violin, second violin, and viola. And I'm going to take the viola and I'm going to split that 5 viola and 3 alto violin. And boom, I now have a perfectly balanced ensemble. 1 treble violin, 3 soprano violins, 6 first violins, 8 first violins, 8 second violins, 5 violas, 3 alto violins, 6 tenor violins, 6 cellos, 4 small bass violins, and 6 double basses. I have the same number. I have a much more balanced and nuanced ensemble. Boom. That would be awesome. Well, I think that strings tend toward just intonation when it's only strings and singers, but they have to play equal temperament with winds and keyboard instruments. Yeah, it's kind of been frozen in time from before World War One. It's been frozen. String section's been frozen in time since, I mean, except for just larger and larger numbers. I mean, it's been frozen in time since Beethoven, essentially. I mean, before Beethoven, really. I mean, yeah, no one has really ever messed with the string section, and I don't know why, because there's potential at it. But I don't know. What do you guys think about that mixture there? So instead of 4 different instruments and 5 voices, I now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different instruments in 10 separate voices. And I think that would be so much more rich. You got this huge bass end too. But yeah, who knows? Maybe I'm crazy. I'm probably crazy, but nah, whatever. The whole orchestra would be, no one's really added anything outside of the percussion section since, right at World War One. And you're right. And a lot of that was economics. My only concern is that you'll have an odd number in the violin section when they tend to divide by desk. I only have an odd number in treble violin, which is a solo instrument, and then the 3 soprano violins, which again are more like solo instruments. Everybody else is in even numbers. But from an instrumental, any reason why violins are divided into 2 parts? Yes. So I was talking with a string player expert friend of mine, and he was saying a lot of the early consorts were actually almost always done in odd numbers. So you would see consorts more in 3, 5, or 7 than you would more in 4, 6, or 8. No. It's 6 tenor violins, 3 treble violins. Well, yeah, you can fudge with numbers, but on that. But yeah, so a lot of the early consort stuff was 5 parts. So and depending on where you were, it was how they divided it. The Germans tended to go more for 2 violins. And the French would do 2, sometimes even 3 viola parts. And they would actually have specific sizes of violas, a small viola, a middle viola, and a big viola for the inner parts, and just 1 violin. And that's actually what the court of Louis XIV was using. never understood two-part violins either. I've always thought it would make more sense to divide the lower instruments than the higher ones. No, you actually want more DVC higher up, and that's rules of acoustics. You can't divide lower parts as easily just because you get acoustical interference. Whereas the higher up you go, the more you can divide. Which is why, if you look, violin music often gets divided up even further. 8-part DVC in first violin is absolutely not unheard of. You see that all the time. But whereas you don't see a lot of DVC within double basses. So that's just following the natural progression of the harmonic series there. Okay, guys, I have been going an hour and 45 minutes, and I know that I still got plenty decent battery. I know we've crapped out before at an hour and 45, but the battery says it's still good. So yeah, but I think I will do a video where we kind of reimagine the orchestra, and we'll kind of use those numbers that I came up with. So that'll be interesting. I'll work on that. So yeah, maybe reimagining the string section. Yeah, my video on composing for the subcontrabass range will explain that. Yeah, you've really got to understand the harmonic series. You want large numbers of bass instruments, but you don't want to divide those bass instruments into harmony. Saxophones. What about saxophones? Put them in the orchestra? Yes, you should put them in the orchestra. That would be awesome and phenomenal. Do I have an idea for the next stream? Yes. I don't think we're going to do the guitars next week because my friend will have company in town. But I think the next one will probably be electronic instruments. So stuff like Ons Martineau, theremin, and the like. So we'll see. But that's kind of the plan, I think. I guess I was thinking more along the pyramid of balance, more lower instruments than higher. Yeah. So, the pyramid of balance. I don't fully believe in the pyramid of balance. Mostly because nobody actually knows what they're doing with it. Particularly in the wind band. Nobody can balance out a... Yep, we'll talk synth next week. I think next week is all going to be electronic instruments. Synth, on Martineau, theremin, EV. Yeah. All right, guys. I have been talking nearly 2 hours now. I mean, we can keep talking strings. I know there's a lot to deal with, but I mean, you could do a whole series on these, but I think for general purposes, I think we're good. And I probably should finish writing all the string chapters for volume 4. But yeah. Okay, guys, if there are no more questions, then we'll go ahead and end this for tonight. And then next week, food. No, I went and got food before this. So I am fooded. I had my orange chicken and broccoli beef, where they didn't put any beef in the broccoli beef. What a ripoff! Hurdy-gurdy. Oh, that would be like in an auxiliary instrument. Have a stream about my main instrument, meta instrument. Yeah, that next week. So yeah, next week we'll do electronics. All right, guys. Let's go ahead and end it now, and I will see you all next week. Oh, and again, links down below to the new merch store and the Patreon if you want to come join the Discord. A bunch of people in here are in the Discord already, and we just have a fun time over there. We were talking deep into literature last night, of all things. Or was that this morning? I can't even remember. But yeah, but and I will probably start scripting soon on the new series that I'm going to be doing, the history of the wind band, that'll start coming out next year. And I really need to start hunkering down and get working on that. But anyway, guys, I will talk to you all later, and have a good night, guys.